This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we are live on the air with Sarah Seltzer. You're a writer, and you're out of New York City. And we're going to talk about your book, The Singer Sisters, and also about the kind of story about like how you can overcome rejection and life's up and downs to write your debut novel. So that's kind of like the focus. But we're going to tell your story. But before we get to that, we always ask every guest on the show a couple of questions before we get to the heart of your story.
All right.
What motivates you and why do you do what you do?
That's a great question. I wish I could say that it's something really noble. But the truth is, for me, I'm just not happy unless I'm doing something creative. And I think a lot of people are this way. It could be, whether it's knitting or adult coloring books or working in your garden or creating an awesome podcast or whatever it is. Most of us are creative. We're encouraged to be creative as kids. And for me, I just get really cranky if I'm not writing. Writing is, it's the easiest way for me to be creative. It's the most inspiring way. I love to read. I love to write. So, publishing is obviously a dream come true and a great goal. But for me, I have to write I don't write every single day, but I have to write and have some kind of project that I'm working on to be happy. It's like exercising or drinking water.
That's awesome because you're an editor at Lilith Magazine, and you did some reporting in the New York Times, and you write essays and cultural criticism. So you're like a professional writer. So you're in your space that you want to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that I always talk to creative people. The whole podcast was developed to talk to people who are creative in all areas. So we end up talking to a lot of writers. And what made you want to write a novel? Because you're writing like articles, being an editor. What made you want to write a novel?
I just think that reading novels is so satisfying. I think all of us, our attention spans are a little less, I don't know how to say this, robust than they were probably before cell phones, before COVID, before everything that's happening in the world.
I'm a child in the 70s, so I understand.
Yeah. But growing up, I was just one of those bookworms. I loved reading, anything from like Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys to the books that were on my school's shelves to my, starting to read my parents' books, get books off of their shelves. And I just, I love the sort of satisfying arc of a novel. It's like, I think to me, it's like the difference between, I love watching TV. I love TV shows, but there's something so satisfying about a 2-hour movie, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, you go on a whole journey. And it's really interesting because my kids are of this generation where they're used to like streaming shows and watching like, 5 or 6 episodes of a show in a row, which we didn't do. And they find movies kind of stressful because of all this. There's a lot like a movie or a novel, a complete like piece of art like that. There's like suspense, there's usually sadness, there's some laughter. There you kind of go through the whole realm of human emotions up and down, and like puts you through your emotional paces. And actually like make my kids watch movies for that reason, because I think it's important for them to like learn how to experience all those
compared
things.
To something that goes like 12 hours or 15 hours.
Exactly.
And it's also the whole art of like I'm a songwriter, and being a child of the 70s, I grew up with vinyl and 8 tracks and actually listening to a complete thought, which means I listened to the whole record.
Yeah. Exactly.
And the books are maybe 200,000 words,
right,
versus 70 or 90 today.
Yeah.
And so the idea that going into Tolkien,
reading
Tolkien, and going back and reading Moby Dick, and actually wanting to read it, was a different mindset instead of like getting the Cliff Notes and finding some kind of AI description for your book report. You actually had to read it.
Right. It's true. And I think that's, so I always thought, because I loved reading them so much, I'd like to try writing one. So that's.
So what made you want to write about a family of folk rock singers?
Yeah, it's funny that you were talking about how much you love vinyl. Some of that comes from discovering my parents' vinyl and the connection I felt to their music. My parents were baby boomers. So like, for instance, like they had like each had a copy of Sgt. Pepper's and like the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, like every kind of like, seminal album from their era. They each had a copy of, and my mom had like the early Beatles albums. They had Stevie Wonder songs in the Key of Life. My dad loved Aretha, so it was like everything. And just to have that treasure trove as a kid, I think, and to hear it, my parents were always playing music, classical, opera, soul, everything.
So you get it all,
yeah. So I'm not a musician, but I think that the book is sort of in part like about the relationship between like Generation X and millennials, and that music of the 60s and 70s that has had such a huge influence on basically everyone and everything that came after it. Because my book is about the mother and father are 60s folk luminaries, folk rock luminaries. Kind of think like maybe Carly Simon and James Taylor, or like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, kind of in between those two. And the daughter wants to be like a rocker, but she's she knows that her mom had this talent and this influence as a 60s folk singer, that it's going to be hard for her to live up to.
From under it.
Get out from under it. And her mom has secrets, and her mom doesn't want her to go off into the music world without a backup plan, and and she doesn't really explain why. So the book is really it's a rock and roll drama. It's about fame and fortune and falling out of fame and the relationship with the audience, but it's also about a mom and daughter kind of coming to understand each other
revealing better. Like a parent sometimes not fully revealing their life to their kid, but then kind of telling them just be on a certain path without giving them the reason.
Exactly, which because we all can relate to. Yeah.
It's like, okay, just do it because I told you. It's like, well, I kind of want to know why.
Exactly.
But that's an interesting dynamic, because as a musician, the Beatles are still kind of like the benchmark in terms of songwriting and album structure. And we're living in an age where people don't go into albums. People, this is the playlist. People don't dive into things. They don't. They want something. Oh, what happened? Oh, we lost you. Oh, you dropped a little bit. Oh, that's terrible. You have a power outage. Try to bring you back. Well, that's disappointing. We think like we're having a technical glitch with her signal. She's there, but then we lost her audio and video. So I'm not sure what happened. If we got a snowstorm going on, I hope we didn't lose her. Seem to have lost your camera and speaker, but you're still in the studio. That's weird. I've never seen this happen before. I don't know if this is a glitch on StreamYard. Usually you don't still see the person there, but not see the video or the audio at all. So I'm going to jump out. You come back all the way. Something happened with the signal. I'm not sure if we had a power outage or a computer breakdown. We'll see. We're waiting for Sarah Seltzer to come back. We're talking about her book, which is The Singer Sisters, which is a book about folk rock, family of folk rock singers, and talking about conflicts and secrets and betrayals and love of music. And hopefully we'll get her back on the air, or we'll have to reschedule. So we'll give her another couple minutes to get back on. But I'll give her a little background while waiting. She's a writer. Sarah is a writer in New York City, and she wrote her debut novel, The Singer Sisters, and she's an editor at Lilith Magazine, has been a journalist for many big and small publications, from Jezebel to New York Times, and she reports on activism, culture, writing essays, and cultural criticism, and an occasional um, opinion piece. So we're hoping that we can get her back on the air. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. Hopefully, it's not a technical problem with StreamYard. But as I said, what we've done before with guests is if we have this kind of technical issue and we can't get her back on, we'll reschedule. So we'll wait and see if she comes back. So we'll see. Seems like we're having a big problem with connectivity. I hope I have another podcast today, so hopefully this is not going to continue. I'm not sure what's going on here. Oh, well, this one got moved. Maybe because of the storm. Okay. We had somebody that canceled. So this might not be, this might end up being having to get rescheduled. I'm just gonna check to see if I got any communications from her. See if we can reschedule. I wait a little bit of time for somebody to come back. I'm not sure what's going on. Give her a little bit of time. And the other person did cancel because they're not feeling well for our 7 o'clock podcast. So let me see. Are we going to get her back? Oh, this guy. Okay. Hey, what?
Hey.
I was wondering, did you have a computer problem or did the
Yeah.
network go down?
I don't know which it was.
Yeah, I was just waiting because we gave you a
sorry.
shot to try to come back, and so yeah, so you came back, so we didn't drop, so we're still here.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry. I don't know what
That's fine. That's technical stuff can happen from time to time. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. So yeah, so my 7 o'clock canceled, so we have some time to kind of
Fantastic.
keep on going. But we were talking about the whole story
Yes.
of and I was kind of going into the idea of the Beatles being the archetype. And you had mentioned like the characters, like, that you were inspired to have the Beatle records and vinyl.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the relationship between us and our parents' music. And I think, it's going to be different, like going forward. Pop music is part of all of our lives, and our kids listen to our music and they have their music, and there's this conversation. But I think for the baby boomers, like that was the first time that pop music was such a huge part of identity and culture.
Yeah.
All these documentaries came out. Yeah, exactly. Like about the music festival that was here in Harlem at Marcus Garvey Park, Summer of Soul. There was the documentary about the Velvet Underground, who were down in New York City in the 60s. Every kind of music that we listen to today kind of originated in that decade. So it was always really interesting to me. So I think that, subconsciously I gravitated towards it when it was time to write my first book.
Well, there's a lot of, being a child of the 70s, I'm a real purveyor of, like, the Velvet Underground is like iconic for me. Dylan is iconic for me.
Totally.
Like they're listening to the Basement tapes, like all 10 hours of it.
Yeah.
The big thing is a big thing for a lot of like purist kind of musicians who like believe in the singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
And the idea that you can actually tell a story with music. And that's why I think there's a synergy between like you get a guy like a Bob Dylan or Neil Young or Joni Mitchell.
Exactly.
Like, that you get drawn into that album like you're reading a novel.
Yeah.
That's the way I feel when I get a
Completely.
really good record. And so then if you have the synergy of have telling a story of a family or like folk rock singers, that's kind of woven into it that like you've got that interconnectedness of the art and the music all in real time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think for me, like I would say that, in some ways like Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan, they're like literary influences on me. I don't, write like them, but the fact that they could tell these stories that captivated me so much.
Mhm.
Really, really made a huge impression on me when I was, younger. And just as much as the novels I was reading, those lyrics are really important. And the book is full of lyrics. I mean, they are not as good as Bob Dylan or Joni Mitchell lyrics by any means, but it was really fun to write them and to have them be they're a key part of the story. So, the characters write things in their songs that maybe they don't feel comfortable saying out loud
Yeah, the
to each other.
vulnerability. Yeah, that's the thing is that
Yeah,
artists sometimes will speak through their music to
exactly.
their partner, to the world,
Yeah.
something that they can't say directly. And then it comes through the art, and you were like, "Wow!" It's like that's so powerful. Like, but then you find out like they really can't tell somebody in person that, but through the song they can. So that dynamic is interesting that you're talking about
Yeah.
because I think the secret sauce of any creative person is the fact that they have that vulnerability
Mhm.
and it
Mhm.
comes through the art. But
Mhm.
then the consequences, like maybe in your story, you talk about the dichotomy of like maybe you can say it in the song, but you actually don't live that way.
Right. That's right. Exactly.
So that becomes a
Exactly.
struggle. Does that become part of the whole factor?
Yeah, it is part of it, that there you can write these really pure things in your music that maybe you can't live up to. For sure. And your pain in life, right? When you turn your pain into art, it can become really beautiful. But in your daily life, if you're experiencing pain or heartbreak, it's just a pain. It's just hard. It's not,
It's hard.
you could make some sort of beautiful art about it. But then when you're dealing with like your kids, as my character is, maybe you're just yelling at them. So that tension that they feel between their mother, who was able to create such beautiful art, and is also just a flawed human being. To
Yeah.
them, she's just their mom. To the rest of the world, she's this iconic songwriter. Is a really interesting thing that I explore as well.
Yeah, because you're living up to the can you live up to the icon status?
Exactly.
And especially with your family, probably you don't,
Right.
because they know the
Right.
truth of like, hey, you know, my parents are just like any other parent, or maybe they're like lacking
Yeah.
what my friends' parents are there, but they're on the road,
Yeah.
or they're in the studio, or
Exactly.
they're on tour, like they're so involved in their head that they're not present.
Right.
And
Right.
so then there's like all this beauty is like, well, I didn't feel that beauty. The
Mhm,
world felt
mhm.
the beauty, but I didn't feel it.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So there's like a resentment with the kids, like about that.
Yeah, there's some of that. There's resentment. There's resentment that I think that, honestly, my character Emma resents her mom's talent, and that her mom chose to step away from music. And she just doesn't understand how somebody so talented would
Oh,
make a
walk away.
different choice. So that's really baffling to her. She is a lacking mom in some ways. She's good in other ways. Like as you would kind of imagine, she's like a cool mom. But she also is is distracted and has her own kind of secret world that her kids aren't part of, and they feel shut out. Particularly her daughter feels shut out from it, and she can't quite understand why. And part of her growing up throughout the novel is kind of coming to understand like what her mom has been through as a woman in music in the 60s, and maybe why her mom acts the way she does, even if it's
Oh,
still flawed, that she has her reasons. So
yeah, because maybe she had a toxic experience and got
exactly.
kind of burned out, or
Right.
it's like this is not for me anymore. Because sometimes
Yeah.
you hit that wall, and it's like you're not
Yeah.
enamored by it anymore.
Yeah. And everyone in
Well,
the family is like a different kind of artist, like, which I think would be really interesting to you because you talk to different kinds of artists on your show. Some of them are more performers and really like being in front of a crowd. Some of them are more like behind the scenes people who like to write and create, maybe like in their rooms. And so there's some tension within the family because it's a whole family of artists. They're all creative and they all like to express themselves, but they do it in different ways. And that actually causes causes tension between them.
Yeah. And there might be like people who think there's like one way, but
Yeah,
there's not one way, but there's
right.
might be this expectation like, oh, well, you're supposed to be on tour, or you're supposed to
Yeah,
do
you're
this, you're supposed to do that.
exactly.
And if you have a different point of view, it's kind of like, Jim Morrison in the Doors.
Right.
At the end of the Doors, Jim was kind of like checking out. Like, I don't want to be the pop star. I want to
Yeah.
be a writer. I want to be a
Yeah.
poet.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so then people are like, well, you've got this great thing with the Doors. It's like,
Right.
well, I'm not there because I
Right.
want to be the poet.
Right.
That's what from the beginning he was the poet. And he
Right.
just happened to fall into it and
Exactly.
it worked. But
Yes.
then that's not where his heart was,
Right. That's exactly like my character, actually. And then there's also the Beatles deciding that they didn't want to tour. So they could just be in the studio and experiment.
right.
I mean,
Yeah,
there's
that's great.
tons of examples of artists coming to these crossroads. I think, as even after I wrote the book, I keep because I continue to love to read about pop culture. I continue to read about rock stars and learn things that like sound very similar to what I wrote about. Like Patti Smith took 18 years off for making music to raise her kids. Like, there's just like these interesting stories
Stories of people
where people come in and out. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, it is people feel like I read about Pete Townsend, like in the Who, and they were kind of like the first punks,
Yeah.
and it's kind of but then at the same time they were punk, they did these progressive rock operas. So you're like, what's the dichotomy with that? Here's this band that's very punk, very much like a pre-Clash band, a pre-Sex Pistols. They're really outrageous. The early version of the Who is like, and even when you saw them, like they had this punk aesthetic, but then they had this progressive bent that seemed to be totally diametrically opposed to what they were doing with Tommy.
Right. Right.
So,
Right.
so what is that?
Yeah.
It's like,
We contain multitudes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's always the interesting thing, the inner conflict with these
Right.
these stories in
Right.
music and pop culture.
Yeah. Right. Just being, and with like Dylan sort of changing his deal every decade or so, like,
Reinventing himself.
Right. Reinventing themselves. And like the Stones making a disco album. I mean, I think you're a singer-songwriter, but a lot of great artists are pushing themselves, or they get burned out and they want to try something different. And so, some of the book is also it's about the family making peace with each other, but also about each sort of artist within the family trying to figure out like where they belong as an artist.
Where their own path is. Like how do they self-actualize
right.
and be happy.
Right.
Because like your management might want you to be happy by putting you on tour.
Right.
So much that you're not even living.
Yeah.
You're kind of just out there. And then like you might have these ideas like Bowie liked to reinvent himself.
Right.
And he was able to get away with it because he had the force of will. That's like, I'm not being moved by whatever they want me to do. I'm going to do what I want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a hard place to be.
Yeah. You have to be really strong.
Don't actually are able to carry that out.
No, you have to be quite strong, I think, to be able to really see your vision through that way. It's fascinating.
So when you're writing the lyrics, like as a writer, it's like, I got to imagine being a folk, like you're building your character like a fantasy novel.
Yeah.
They go create their characters, you get the whole, these big fantasy worlds that people build up.
Right.
But now you have to build this world and have authentic voice as a folk rock singer. So like, I guess you're pulling from what you love because you love that genre anyway.
Yeah.
So then as a writer, it's like, well, I know how I can weave this because as a musician, like I don't copy Leadbelly.
Right.
Right. Note for note. But if I get in that mode, I'm going to be in that zone.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So it's kind of not like plagiarism, but I can kind of feel what Leadbelly was doing.
Exactly.
And go that way.
Yeah, exactly. So for each song, each set of lyrics that I wrote in the novel, and there are quite a few, I kind of had a mood and a couple of singers in mind, maybe a couple of songs. So it was like, oh, this is going to be like, this song is going to be like a road trip song, and I have like a Joni Mitchell song maybe and a Bob Dylan song in mind as I'm writing it, but it's its own thing. So that was kind of how I approached it. And for me, the lyrics were fun because like lyrics, at least, pop lyrics don't have to be brilliant. They just have to sound catchy. So it was a different muscle to work than say like trying to write a really good poem. you can rhyme like I and by and
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. He can have
my.
that, yeah, he can
Um,
have that
yeah,
that rhyme structure because
but
it
it's
has to work as a
yeah.
harmony, as a song, as a melody.
Exactly, exactly. But I think also like really trying to, at least in some of the lyrics, like hit some emotional beats so that my readers would try to experience what the characters were experiencing as they were
Yeah,
writing and
yeah.
listening to the songs.
Yeah, that's the
That was
interesting
fun.
thing. Like
Yeah.
the way you see Dylan go into like Tangled Up in Blue, or like
Yeah.
songs like Idiot
Yeah.
Wind,
Yeah.
right? And
Which
a
I've been
lot of the
listening to
stuff
a lot
that's on
recently.
Blood on the
Yeah.
Tracks
Yeah. Yeah.
is like, even though it's about his marriage, if you listen to those songs, he creates characters within the
Totally.
song that are
A
like
man
not
named Greg.
they're like separate from him,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it's supposed to
Totally.
be about his divorce.
Right.
He's still
Right.
making these characters.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like the emotions are coming from him, but the stories, he's like a magpie. He's grabbing little stories from everywhere all around him, which is cool. Yeah,
Yeah, so that's just
yeah,
a cool way of
it's
like
so cool.
approaching. And
Yeah,
then you get the other end, like if you deal with like a Joni Mitchell or Neil Young, and they
yeah,
get to these really like like vulnerable lyrics
yeah, exactly.
that
Yeah.
pull, like, when you get Neil, is like a lot of times I love his stuff where he's got that kind of shaky pitch. They even called him
Mhm.
shaky sometimes because
Mhm.
he had this thing where he would like have this pitch is like wavering.
Yeah.
And he would do it like that on Tonight's the Night, and he's talking
Yeah.
about the death of one of his roadies.
Yeah.
And it's just so poignant, and he's not trying to be perfect. He's like, I'm not. He actually said, I was going into the ditch. He had this thing called the Ditch Trilogy.
Yeah.
He had done like all these perfect pitch type records, and he said, well, I'm not going to go that way. I'm going to go for the vulnerability of my voice
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
tell the story in that way, so it's like very present. So in terms of like the approach of your characters, how do
Mhm.
they like approach their voices? Are you able to kind of describe that with your
A
text?
little bit, yeah. So, the two sisters, I kind of had fun with the two sisters in the band together, the singer sisters. So the folk band in the 60s is my main character, one of my two main characters, Judy, and she's also with her sister Sylvia, who's a character in the novel too. And Sylvia has like the pure voice. Sylvia is like the one who sort of sounds like, everyone says she sounds like Joan Baez or Judy Collins or one of these,
Oh, okay.
and like Judy is the really talented songwriter, but she has the rougher voice. And so at the beginning of the novel, when they're teenagers, everyone thinks of Sylvia as the talent because she's more beautiful, she's taller, she's more confident, and she has the more beautiful, like classically beautiful voice. But Judy is like the secret weapon.
Yeah.
And by the end, everyone recognizes that she's a really good songwriter, and that her voice, even though her voice is rougher and she's singing harmony, she actually has something to offer too with her voice. So that there's a little bit of that. And then Emma, the daughter, is more of like a riot girl screaming, rougher voice. Yeah.
Or
Yeah, I tried.
girly sound type of thing.
Yeah.
Like Liz Fair type of.
Exactly. Liz Fair is exactly one of my, inspirations for her. So there, I did try to kind of make each of them like a little bit of a composite of like different, they're their own characters, and then they're also like, maybe 5 or 6 for each character, real singers who they're supposed to kind of be like or similar to. And so that was also really fun because, like for Emma, the rocker, like there's Liz Fair, like she has qualities of someone like an Alanis, who is like really, really famous and a huge pop star, but also someone like, Ani DeFranco, who was always like an indie author, super indie, and, going around just with her guitar. So I kind of was like able to bring in some things from both of them, which I thought, which was
like a Juliana
cool.
Hatfield kind of Blake
Yeah,
Baby.
exactly. Yeah. So there's, it's fun. Yeah. So it's fun. And I think, what was really fun about the book, and what's been fun about, it's been out for about 6 months now, is that some readers who, like you, clearly are, super, super up on their pop culture, like get all the references, and they're like, oh, like Emma is like these musicians. And, and some people maybe only understand the music from the 60s or only understand from the 90s, but they just, are enjoying the vibe. And some people are just in it for the family drama and they don't care about the music at all.
Yeah. Because if you're a good writer, you can pull somebody into something just because of the narrative and the dialogue. And if people get hooked, it's like, they get hooked on that song, they get pulled into the song, you get hooked by the intrigue, right? the
Yeah.
drama,
Exactly.
right? Like
Exactly.
if you
Yeah.
then he's like, oh, I like this kind of, maybe not that it's a soap opera, but they like the idea you get pulled into the kind of story between the people, like
Yeah.
just a dialogue that between different souls and
Yeah.
how they respond to life. Can
Exactly.
people can see things that like, oh, that mirrors things I have experienced, and people, every time somebody hears a song, the fan kind of
Exactly.
owns it, right?
Right.
They get the vision. The songwriter wrote this, but the fans got that. Do you address that kind of thing
Yes,
in your book?
definitely. Definitely. I think so much for Judy in particular, who's the 60s iconic songwriter. She's writing these songs that are really from her own experience. They're kind of diaristic. They are Joni Mitchell like in that way, but people are interpreting them. She has these fans coming up to her and being like, you wrote about me, like you wrote about my life. And she's always just like, I was just trying to write a nice song. So that's definitely a conflict that she experiences, that, people kind of see her as a prophet. And that is what, Dylan has so obviously struggled with his whole career,
Yeah, he
the
always has.
expectations that people have of him and of his lyrics. And so I wanted that to be
The other thing, it's
part of
hard.
her
It
story
becomes a
too.
big weight on your
It
shoulders,
is a big weight.
and
And
then
that's one of the
sometimes
reasons.
like people
Yeah.
get disappointed.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
And
it's like people get disappointed in Dylan when he doesn't represent like the ideology the way they think he should.
exactly.
Especially with
Exactly.
his like people asking about his protest music.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then he kind of like Scorsese interviewed him and he's
Mhm.
like kind of walking away from it. He said, well,
Yeah.
so that was just a song
Yeah.
that I wrote. It's like I wasn't part of the movement. I'm a writer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I just interpret, and that's not exactly where I am. It's like, okay, people
Yeah.
that weren't buying it because
Yeah.
they
Because
were
he was
attaching
so
their
good
own
at it.
to they're
Yeah.
like, well, you must believe in that because you
Yeah.
wrote it.
And I think he did, I think he really did, because the songs are so authentic. But I also think that he was just, yeah, he was also kind of a documentarian who was writing about everything he saw. So he was able to, he has that quality of being able to kind of inhabit different
Spaces, yeah.
spaces. And it's true, like the protest songs he wrote in those 2 or 3 years were extraordinary. And my characters actually talk about it in the book. Like in the opening scene, they're talking about Blowing in the Wind.
Yeah.
And talking about how, like, what an amazing song it is, and how hard it is to write their own songs after something like that.
So like that comes along. How do
Yeah,
you match that? But it's like
exactly.
the thing is like you got to find something that's like inside of you.
Exactly.
Where I think the comparison
Yeah.
trap is where you get stuck. Like if you're trying to write that, well, Dylan wrote it.
Yeah.
You need to find
Right.
something like that's inside of you, right?
Exactly.
Something you've experienced that's uniquely something, but then you can put a shine on it, and then it becomes like that's your voice, and then you
Exactly.
can take it and put it out there, and that's how you get these indie, people like the Liz Phair and the Juliana
Mhm.
Hatfields. Because they're able to get out there as a singer songwriter and
Right.
have their voice, and they're not Joni Mitchell,
Right.
and
Right. But they're so
they're not.
authentically themselves.
They're themselves, they're
Mhm.
like who they are, but they're like
Yeah.
they might have been inspired by Joni to get on stage and do it,
Mhm.
but they're not her.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all true.
That's
Yeah.
cool. But the
Yeah.
whole dynamic of your book is super interesting to me because growing up in that era
Yeah.
where the
Yeah.
song is so important,
So important.
and the writer, not that like the guys on Tin Pan Alley are writing it, like you wrote it.
Mhm.
Like the difference is like the idea, like you had this whole machine of like songwriters that would like Sinatra and
Right.
give it to
Yeah.
all these great singers,
Right.
but like nobody thought that maybe they should write it. It's like, no,
Yeah.
that's somebody else should write it. The idea that you could have the permission to write, is that kind of coming from the fact that that their family was famous, or that they felt like, that gave them permission structure to be a writer?
I think that that's what that's why I decided to put it in the folk genre, because we're talking about, I like lots of different kinds of music, but I think what was so interesting about the folk revival, and it's kind of addressed in the new Dylan movie, like
Mhm.
this Greenwich Village folk revival of the early 60s, was like, that was what made it so revolutionary, was that like you could have a guitar and write your own songs, or thanks to Dylan, write your own
Yeah.
songs, and just like you didn't have to be a musical prodigy. You didn't have to be super well trained. All you needed was a guitar, and you could borrow someone's guitar, and then suddenly you could do it yourself. And that was the big change from like the Tin Pan Alley era. That, you know, so like it's a very appealing, the idea that you could just kind of pack your guitar up and go and start playing at these hootenannies and these clubs. And, you know, it was a very brief period, but it was so fruitful. And it's obviously still so big in all of our imaginations.
Yeah, I mean, still in the indie world, you know, I find indie musicians all over the world that I tend to interview, not as much as I used to, but, you know, every month I get 2 or 3 independent acts. Doesn't matter where they are. And if I find them interesting, I bring them to the world, and because I've always liked that. You know, as a fan of music. I like to find the people who are doing something that's maybe not you know, hasn't hit the world yet. It's like the indie emerging artist.
Right.
The person who's willing to kind of get out there and be the Velvet Underground of their generation.
Right. Totally.
You know? Yeah, that's what I'm always looking for, that, because that to me is like, that's exciting to hear something that's not so on repeat. Everybody likes to just take the cloned thing. And you know, the thing that's kind of expected of you, instead of like trying to actually, you know, be willing to have your own voice out there.
And when people hear an original voice, they get so excited about it. So
it's just a kind of in an era where people think you can just AI everything.
I know. And yeah, I know. I think it's so interesting that the Dylan movie is so big at this moment because of that. Because it's really making a case for like authenticity and you know, having your own voice, you know, but in its portrayal, not just of Dylan, but also of like the other musicians who are in the movie,
Pete Seeger
and Baez, and like, you know, the folkies and bluesies John who comes through. And they're each so unique and so true to themselves. And it's not a big production for any of them. It's just, you know, like their voices. And so it's very appealing right now.
Just have that Americana thing. You know, the idea when Dylan got with the band, and they created this Americana vibe at Big Pink. And these songs, is like, this stuff could have been written like in the 30s, right? You know, it's like, it's kind of folky, hillbilly,
it
Americana.
Sounds,
weirdness. And then, but it wasn't just that.
Because there's poetry and lyricism.
Poetry and saying all these, but it's coming from this kind of, it's not country, but it's kind of coming from country. It's got rock in it. Robbie's throwing these licks in there, and you're like, what's going on? And you know, it's just, to me, is like, that has always been the process of those basement tapes. Like of the process that a songwriter goes through to do their work. And the idea that you know, like Dylan on his typewriter, he's kind of famous for just going on his typewriter, just kind of stream of consciousness, getting it out, and just coming. He's like channeling something from the muse, and he's able to just put all this material out. And you're like, what? How is he able to? Did you go into like, how do your characters create their work? I mean, did it come from like angst or hard work, or like, how do they develop their songs?
I think it's different for all of them. I think that, you know, for Judy, the one who's sort of the most talented songwriter of the group, she, you know, is really naturally gifted in the way that like Joni Mitchell or Dylan is. And she's also just really, really smart. And she also has like huge, in the world of parenting, we'd say she has very big feelings. And she feels really restricted by society. So she has a lot of anger. So, and sadness about kind of, you know, how everyone expects her to conform and be a certain way. So a lot of her songwriting, her kind of most famous songs, come from that. And then everyone else around her is writing songs differently. Her husband is more of like a poppy, like melody guy. And for him, I think it's more hard work. And he's like, just more of like a natural showbiz guy. You know, she's more of a poet and he's like a performer. And then her daughter, you know, is more imitative. I think she hasn't, maybe like, she's still in the process of finding her voice, but she does her kind of most famous song in the book comes from like a letter. She turns a letter that a stalker fan of her mom's leaves. She turns that into a big song. The way that was sort of borrowed from Sarah McLachlan had this big song in the 90s that was, I think, like a stalker, like she turned a stalker's letter.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So and this is a little different because it wasn't like menacing, but it was but yeah, because she doesn't have material yet because she's kind of more spoiled. Like her parents were successful musicians, and she's goes to an art school, and she kind of is free to do whatever she wants. So like her mom was rebelling, was such a was so angry because in the 60s, it was, really, really still very strict for young women. And there's a lot of shame and stuff. And for Emma, like her parents let her do whatever. She's roaming around New York City with her friends. She has piercings. She has tattoos, it's harder for her to find her voice. Yeah. She's more of a free spirit. So I think that is another tension that sort of animates the book, is that her mother has a much harder life, but that also like leads to more productive songwriting. And so, Emma
because if you don't go through the struggle, that's always the rub.
Which isn't how it is for everyone. I mean, like Taylor Swift, I think, can write, is a pretty privileged person, and she, can turn her everyday breakups and like friendship dramas into these incredible songs. So,
I think it's that writer's ability to process.
Exactly.
You could be in a really good place financially and still be able to kind of process.
And heartbreak is universal,
which is like you still more money, more problems. So you can still find the pain in it, right?
Yeah.
Like Neil Young, he always found.
Yeah.
And he was like, and he would kind of talk about it, like, I'm making all this money, but there's people around me dying. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna look at not just myself, I'm gonna look at everything else.
Right.
You find, it's just how you weave the story.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the talent of a creative. Is like you can take the everyday thing you see. You could go to a cafe and see something and then put that into a song. You could walk down the street and see something. You look up and see, you're just able to look at things and then also find something in yourself, like a feeling, and then weave that together with the external, and then suddenly it's magical. Like, and some people maybe can't process, like, wow, how can you do that?
Yeah.
But like, that's what the creative soul
It's not that different from writing fiction, or other kinds of creativity where I think you're always mixing like your internal state and your emotions with things that you observe or feel externally. So, in the same way, like this book, I'm not a musician. I've never been famous, but some of the questions about making art versus being a parent versus, like what are your duties to your creativity versus to the people you love, that, that's coming from me. And the close, my family and I are super close. We don't have the kind of rivalries that the family does, but just the like family dynamic, the close family, the constant back and forth, that comes from my family too. So I think most of it is coming from pop culture, but you have to have something of yourself.
Yeah, you weave in like your own.
Yeah, that makes it feel authentic. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're able to take those pieces that you're willing to share.
Yeah.
The vulnerability of opening up. And then weaving it, and then like Dylan, he put layers. He would create
layers and layers,
and then like all kinds of synonyms and all these things is like allegory, and it's like, but it's really under the covers. It's him. you dive down, but it's still able to take all the layers, and you kind of uncover like, well, how much of this is like where you get down to the real raw emotion.
I know. And when you hear like a really personal Dylan song, it's always so it's almost shocking, because so many of his songs are so layered, and then occasionally he'll hit you with with a song that's just like very, very straightforward and emotional, and you're like, wow, he can do that too. Like it's just he can do it all.
It's just cool when you can have that emotional connection to your audience and not be scared of it, because I think that's the thing, is the fear and safety as a human. And when you get to be an artist, you tend to be a little tread into places that could be a little unsafe in terms of like maybe you could feel because you're revealing a lot, and if somebody hates it, then you take it as a hit, as a personal attack, because like that is me. that you're attacking, but then you have a little bit of a suit of armor when you're, say, well, it doesn't matter, but down deep, it might matter if somebody kills your song and you were putting all your heart into it. You
Yeah.
might say it doesn't matter, but it does.
For sure. Yeah.
Like the critical reviews, like, did you go
Exactly.
through anything with like the critics, like slamming any of your artists or
Yes.
having like issues,
Mhm.
like, and then
Yeah.
they're kind of like, well,
Yeah.
how do they handle it?
Yeah, there's a whole scene where there's like a sexist Village Voice critic who really goes off after Judy, and she pretends that she doesn't care, but like then I have her like his voice is in her head for like the next few chapters because she
Mhm.
she
Can't
says she
get it
doesn't
out.
care, but she can't get it. Yeah, so it's definitely a part of the book, that whole process. And it's funny because then I'm going through the process, or I've been through the process of seeing people review my book. And I'm pretty tough, thick skin because I've written for the internet for over a decade, and so I've
You have to be on
tweeters and
that.
tweeters, and but it's still different when it's your creative work. And it's so far it's been fine, but I can relate to my characters now more. Having gone through that.
Have you thought of this being turned into a screenplay or a teleplay? Do you think anybody? Because it seems like it could fit that in that world.
Yeah,
from what we've been talking about.
People are people keep bringing that up. I mean, I have a film agent, and we'll just have to see, what happens with the book. I do think it would be a great miniseries.
Yeah, I definitely see it in the way
Yeah.
I could see it being out there in the world and in the streaming world as like a drama, like a teledrama.
Yeah,
Or it
exactly.
could actually be a separate film as an independent film. If you had
Yeah.
an indie film director take it and turn it into a short form, into a 2-hour, 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
It seems like you could go either way. It
Yeah.
just depends. I know that they mentioned that people like to be, just sitting and watching like 10 hours of a single series all
Right.
at once, like binge watching.
Yeah.
So given that is they could get the whole thing in a weekend.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then maybe you got 10 hours to do it versus 2 hours. So then you can go into things at a really great level of detail.
Yeah.
That you probably can't in 2 hours. Like a film director has to make choices, but
Yeah.
sometimes those choices is what makes the movie.
Yeah. You can have fun with a miniseries. I think for any novel, you can have fun with like the minor characters and the subplots, and developing those more.
Stretch it out.
Cool.
And
That'd
make
be
it
fun. Yeah.
dive into it.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool. I mean,
Yeah.
the opportunities in the world as a creator, like once you put something out there, they can spawn all these other things. You can do audiobook, you can do the teleplay, screenplay, movie, you can do a theater play for it. There's like it just opens up like a lot of possibilities.
Yeah.
Are you working on like a second book?
And by the way, there is a great audiobook for this. They hired 3 wonderful actresses to do it. So so that was really cool also because hearing it in other people's voices. Yes, I'm working on another book. I at the very beginning stages. This book took 7 years, the Singer Sisters, between starting to draft it and it getting published. So I'm not rushing myself for book number 2. I have, a day job and little kids. But I'm trying, because of what we were saying at the very beginning before my internet cut out, that I just have to, I have to be working on something, and I feel better.
Yeah, the drive as an artist, like you do it because you love it, and then it's like the law of attraction, or you kind of throw things out in the world, and you get your tribe comes to it, right? Because that's what. Yeah, I've always been a big believer as a songwriter. Is like sometimes I'll just throw something into SoundCloud.
Yeah, and see what happens.
Just to see what happens, and then sometimes you get to work with somebody. Somebody finds some, so you would have never, if you just kept it to yourself, then you would lose the opportunity to actually somebody so Norway likes it, and then you start working with them.
Right.
And you end up having a relationship with somebody you would have never had because you were too scared to put it out in the world.
Right.
You're right. The opportunity to get it out there allows you to connect.
Yeah, connecting is, and that's, I think, it's something that I cover in the book, and then something that I've thought about just as a creative person, and the last 6 months touring the book, and realizing that that so much of creativity isn't just about finding like a big audience and fame. It's about those connections, like people. It's an opportunity for connection, for human connection, and every single person who reads the book and has a meaningful experience, or that comes to one of my readings and talks to me about their grandpa was a singer, and they relate to it for that reason. It's an incredible thing. And
it gets people talking.
beautiful.
It gets people vibing, and then tells people
Totally.
like why they love music, or maybe they want to pick up the guitar again,
Exactly.
or maybe they want to go talk to somebody, or maybe they want to be a writer because they saw what you did and they say, hey, I could have that voice too.
Yeah.
So it gives people the permission structure to kind of to believe and to participate, in life.
Yeah.
Because then you put it out there and people find the synergy, they find the things that they resonate with them. You hit that kind of, Pete Townsend talking about this universal note, right? This key that who's next, everybody was going to pick up on and get to. And I find it's like in art, that happens, that idea he had, that's out there.
It is totally, it really is.
So we've got your link.
Yeah,
it's kind of like long with the number, but that will be fully clickable. It's the Singer Sisters link. You can see at the end, it says Singer Sisters, but that will be fully.
You can also just Google the Singer Sisters.
So that will bring you right to that. To your publisher.
Exactly. It is my publisher's site for the book, and the book looks like this. It has a lady guitar in front.
Oh, that's awesome.
Cool. Yeah, I love it. It looks like an old concert poster.
It does have that vibe.
Yeah,
like a 70s vibe.
Yeah, totally. Yep. So it's fun, and it's it's a good cover, for merch.
Oh, merch is good. It's like you never know. You go to a book site, and sometimes you want to have a poster, and a T-shirt, and the buttons. Like that's how we in the music industry we can make more money from our shirts.
Exactly.
than we do from our than for the album.
This is true.
But that's how it works.
Yeah.
But it's just cool to talk to you today. I'm sorry for that interruption we had.
I'm sorry too.
But at least we were able to finish the interview.
Yeah.
I think that's really important, and people got to hear about like your voice through this book. And I think this book is, being a fan of music, I'm excited to tell my friends about it. I have a lot of friends, in my age group that are always kind of lamenting that this isn't the age of the singer-songwriter, right?
Well, this is the book for you.
It's like I'm gonna tell my best friend tonight. He's an attorney, but he's always looking for something cool to read, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna get him to check you out." So
great, thank you so much. It was really fun talking to you, and we had such a great point of connection with all our shared love of 70s singer-songwriters. So it was a delight.
Well, thank you, and have a great night.
Okay, take care.